Have you ever noticed how your thoughtfulness gets mistaken for coldness? How your need for depth repels the very people you thought would value substance? How the more authentic you become, the more isolated you feel? But here's the brutal reality nobody wants to admit. Your intelligence isn't driving people away. It's revealing who was never meant to stay in the first place. Arthur Schopenhauer understood something about human nature that most refuse to accept. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. But you've learned this lesson the hard way. Every time you've tried to fit in, to play the expected role, to perform the dance of social approval, something inside you died. You're not dangerous because you lack empathy. You are dangerous because you possess something far more threatening than aggression: authenticity. And in a world built on pretense, authentic presence becomes an act of revolution. Most people navigate relationships through what I call emotional theatre. They've memorized scripts about love, learned choreographed responses to conflict, perfected performances designed to extract validation. But you stopped memorizing lines years ago. When you encounter someone new, you're not asking, how can I impress them? You're asking, who are they beneath the mask? This fundamental shift in questioning changes everything about how others experience you. Nietzsche wrote about the herd mentality, the way most humans seek safety in collective thinking, collective behavior, collective unconsciousness. But the thinking man stands outside the herd by necessity, not because he's superior, but because he's awake. And awakeness, real awakeness, is always a solitary experience. Women don't fear your intelligence because it threatens their intellect. They fear it because it threatens their illusions. When you look at someone with clear eyes, when you listen beneath their words, when you remain unmoved by emotional manipulation, you become a living reminder of what genuine connection actually requires. Most people confuse intensity with depth, chaos with passion, neediness with love. But you've developed what philosophers call the discriminating eye, the ability to see what is versus what appears to be, and that discrimination makes you incompatible with those still living in appearances. Schopenhauer spoke of intellectual loneliness, the isolation that comes not from being rejected, but from being fundamentally different in how you process reality. You think before you feel. You observe before you react. You question before you accept. These aren't character flaws, they're signs of conscious evolution. But consciousness comes with a price. The more aware you become, the smaller your world gets. Not because you're becoming antisocial, but because you're becoming selective. You'd rather have no relationship than a dishonest one. You'd rather be alone than pretend to be someone you're not. This selectivity terrifies people who measure their worth by how many others want them. They cannot comprehend choosing solitude over compromise because they've never tasted the peace that comes from complete self-acceptance. You've probably noticed how conversations change when you enter a room, how the superficial chatter dies down, how people become self-conscious about their words, their jokes, their casual cruelties. This isn't because you're judgmental, it's because your presence demands authenticity from others, and most people are terrified of being authentic. The intelligent man develops what I call psychological sonar, the ability to detect incongruence between what people say and what they feel, between their public persona and their private reality. This isn't mind reading, it's pattern recognition developed through years of careful observation. When you possess this level of perceptual acuity, casual relationships become impossible. You can't unsee the games once you've learned to recognize them. You can't participate in emotional manipulation once you understand its mechanics. You can't fake chemistry once you've experienced genuine connection. This creates what philosophers call the burden of consciousness, the weight of seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable blindness. Every interaction becomes a choice. Do you play along with the illusion, or do you stand firm in reality? Most men choose the illusion. It's easier to pretend that needy behavior is romantic, that jealousy is passion, that confusion is chemistry. But you've chosen the harder path, the path of psychological integrity. Nietzsche understood that the higher men must create their own values because society's values are designed for the masses, not for those who think independently. You've begun this process of value creation in your own life, where others see success in terms of acquisition, attention, approval, sexual conquest. You've begun measuring success in terms of alignment. How honestly are you living? How much of your essence have you preserved? How closely does your external life match your internal values? This revaluation of values makes you incompatible with conventional dating culture. You can no longer celebrate hollow victories or pursue meaningless connections. You've developed what ancient Greeks called sophrosin, the wisdom of knowing what is truly valuable. The thinking man also recognizes that most human interactions operate on unconscious contracts. I'll pretend to be impressed by you if you pretend to be impressed by me. I'll validate your ego if you validate mine. I'll play the role you want if you play the role I want. But you've cancelled these contracts. You refuse to trade authenticity for acceptance. You won't perform masculinity to earn femininity. You won't pretend to be less intelligent to make others feel more comfortable. This refusal to participate in unconscious bargaining makes you appear difficult to those still operating within these systems. They can't figure out what you want from them because you don't want anything except honesty. And honesty is the one thing most people cannot give. Schopenhauer wrote about the world as will and representation, the difference between how things actually are and how we represent them to ourselves. Most people live entirely in representation, in the stories they tell themselves about reality. But you've glimpsed the will beneath the representation. You've seen the raw motivations, the unconscious drives, the primitive needs that most romantic behavior attempts to disguise. Once you see the will beneath the representation, you can no longer be seduced by pretty packaging. You look for substance, not style, depth, not display, character, not charisma. This creates a filtering effect that most people experience as rejection. Your standards automatically screen out those who haven't done their own inner work. Your authenticity repels those still wearing masks. Your depth intimidates those living on the surface. But this filtering isn't a bug, it's a feature. Every person who finds your intelligence threatening is revealing their own psychological immaturity. Every woman who prefers performance to presence is showing you that she's not ready for real intimacy. The intelligent man learns to read these signals not as personal failures, but as useful information. You're not being rejected, you're being sorted. Reality is separating the conscious from the unconscious, the authentic from the artificial, the ready from the unready. This sorting process can feel brutal because it happens in isolation. Unlike the man who gets rejected for obvious reasons, rudeness, poverty, ugliness, you get rejected for invisible reasons that most people can't even articulate. They'll say you're too intense when they mean too real. They'll call you emotionally unavailable when they mean emotionally self-sufficient. They'll claim you're overthinking when they mean thinking at all. These misdiagnoses used to confuse you. Now you recognize them as translations. When someone says you're too much, they're really saying they're not enough. When they claim you're complicated, they're revealing their own simplicity. When they accuse you of being cold, they're admitting their own emotional chaos. Nietzsche spoke of amor fati, the love of one's fate, including its difficulties. The intelligent man learns to love his isolation because he understands its purpose. Every rejection teaches him about his own worth. Every misunderstanding clarifies his values. Every lonely night deepens his self-knowledge. You're not being punished for your intelligence. You're being prepared. Prepared for the rare encounter with someone who has also done the work of becoming conscious. Someone who has also questioned everything, faced their shadows, and emerged with their soul intact. When two such people meet, there's no performance because there's nothing to hide. No games because there's nothing to win. No manipulation because there's nothing to control. There's only recognition, the profound relief of being seen and accepted for who you actually are. But this meeting requires patience, faith, and the willingness to walk alone until it happens. Most men cannot pay this price. They'd rather settle for surface connections than endure the depths of solitude. You've chosen differently. You've chosen truth over comfort, depth over convenience, authenticity over acceptance. And that choice, difficult as it is, has made you dangerous to a system built on unconsciousness. The unconscious world needs men to be predictable, controllable, manipulable. It needs them to chase approval, seek validation, perform for attention. When a man steps outside this system, when he becomes self-sufficient and selective, he threatens the entire economy of emotional manipulation. Your intelligence has freed you from the matrix of mutual need that keeps most relationships trapped in cycles of dysfunction. You no longer need someone to complete you because you've learned to complete yourself. You no longer need validation because you've learned to validate yourself. You no longer need approval because you've learned to approve of yourself. This self-sufficiency is more attractive than any performance, but it's also more threatening than any aggression. Because once a man becomes truly independent, he can only be chosen, never trapped. The woman who will appreciate your intelligence exists, but she's also walking this path of consciousness. She's also questioning everything, facing her shadows, choosing authenticity over acceptance. She's not waiting to be rescued, she's rescuing herself. And when you meet her, you'll recognize each other instantly. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Not because you complete each other, but because you complement each other. Two whole people choosing each other rather than two halves, desperately trying to become one. Until that meeting, you continue the work. You deepen your understanding. You strengthen your boundaries. You refuse to compromise your essence for temporary comfort. Because settling is spiritual suicide. And you've come too far to die now. Your intelligence isn't a curse, it's a compass. It points you away from illusion and toward truth, away from performance and toward presence, away from desperation and toward dignity. The path of consciousness is narrow and often lonely, but it leads to something most people never find, a life that reflects your deepest values, relationships that honor your authentic self, and the unshakable peace that comes from never having to pretend to be someone you're not. Schopenhauer once said, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." You've learned to love your solitude because you've learned to love your freedom. Freedom from other people's expectations, freedom from society's scripts, freedom from the exhausting performance of being acceptable. And that freedom, quiet as it may seem, is the most revolutionary force in the world. Because a man who is truly free cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated, cannot be reduced to playing someone else's game. You are not broken for preferring depth to surface, truth to comfort, authenticity to acceptance. You are evolved. And evolution, by definition, means leaving the old behind and embracing something new. The world needs men like you now more than ever. Men who think before they act. Men who feel deeply but don't react emotionally. Men who see clearly through the fog of social conditioning. Your intelligence is your gift to the world, even when the world doesn't know how to receive it. Keep thinking, keep questioning, keep being authentic. Because somewhere in this world, there's someone who needs exactly what you offer. The rare gift of genuine human connection, untainted by performance, manipulation, or need. But let's dive deeper into what this transformation actually looks like in practice. Because understanding the theory is one thing, living it is another entirely. The intelligent man begins to notice subtle shifts in how he moves through the world. His pace slows down, not because he's lazy, but because he's no longer rushing toward external validation. He walks with the quiet confidence of someone who has found his center and refuses to be knocked off balance by other people's chaos. His speech patterns change too. Where once he might have filled silence with nervous chatter, now he lets silence breathe. He discovers that his words carry more weight when he uses fewer of them. People lean in when he speaks because they sense that what he's about to say has been carefully considered. This economy of language makes others uncomfortable at first. They're used to men who overshare, who explain themselves repeatedly, who seek approval through verbal performance. But your measured responses force them to actually listen, rather than simply wait for their turn to speak. The intelligent man also develops what ancient Stoics called preferred indifferent, the ability to have preferences without being enslaved by them. He prefers genuine connection, but isn't desperate for it. He prefers truth, but can handle lies. He prefers depth, but can navigate surface interactions when necessary. This emotional flexibility makes him simultaneously more attractive and more intimidating. Attractive because desperation repels everyone. Intimidating because people can't figure out how to control someone who doesn't need anything from them. In professional settings, this transformation becomes equally apparent. You stop competing for attention in meetings and start contributing when you actually have something valuable to add. You stop networking frantically and start building relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual use. Your colleagues begin to treat you differently, some with newfound respect, others with suspicious confusion. They can't place you in their usual categories of aggressive climber or passive follower. You've become something else entirely, someone who plays a different game altogether. The dating world becomes particularly interesting to navigate once you've undergone this psychological evolution. You find yourself genuinely puzzled by behaviours that once seemed normal. The woman who creates drama to test your commitment. The one who withdraws affection to see if you'll chase. The one who flirts with other men to make you jealous. These strategies designed to hook unconscious men bounce off you like arrows off armour. Not because you're cold, but because you recognise them as manipulation attempts. And once you see manipulation clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend it's love. You can't participate in the game. This creates a fascinating dynamic where women begin testing you in increasingly creative ways, trying to find the lever that will make you react, compete, perform. When they realise no such lever exists, they typically move through predictable stages: confusion, frustration, respect, or departure. The ones who depart were never meant for you anyway. The ones who develop respect are the ones worth getting to know better. Schopenhauer understood that most human suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are. But the intelligent man has learned the art of acceptance without resignation. He accepts reality while working to improve what can be improved and finding peace with what cannot be changed. This philosophical approach extends to how you handle rejection, criticism, and misunderstanding. Where once these experiences might have sent you into spirals of self-doubt, now they provide useful information about other people's capacity for authenticity. When someone calls you too serious, you hear, "I'm not ready for depth." When they say you're emotionally unavailable, you translate it to, "I need constant emotional validation." When they claim you're overthinking, you understand they mean thinking at all makes me uncomfortable. These translations aren't meant to be judgmental, they're meant to be accurate. And accuracy in human relationships is a rare and valuable skill. The intelligent man also learns to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected from others. Solitude is the joy of being connected to yourself. Once you master this distinction, being alone stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like privilege. You begin to treasure your quiet mornings, your thoughtful walks, your evenings spent reading or reflecting. These aren't consolation prizes for failing to find company. They're the foundation of your psychological strength. This comfort with solitude has an unexpected side effect. It makes you magnetic to other people who value depth. They sense your contentment with yourself and are drawn to it like a moth to flame. Not because they want to possess it, but because they recognize something they're missing in themselves. The paradox becomes clear. The less you need people, the more the right people want to be around you. The more complete you become on your own, the more attractive you become to others who are also working toward completeness. But this attractiveness comes with responsibility. When someone is drawn to your centered presence, you must decide whether they're seeking to learn from your example or simply hoping to use you as an emotional stabilizer. The former leads to genuine connection. The latter leads to yet another performance-based relationship. Learning to make this distinction quickly becomes crucial. You develop what I call authenticity radar, the ability to sense whether someone is interested in who you actually are or who they imagine you might become for them. The signs become obvious once you know what to look for. Authentic interest asks questions about your thoughts, your values, your perspectives. Inauthentic interest focuses on what you can provide: security, status, entertainment, emotional regulation. Authentic people want to understand your boundaries and respect them. Inauthentic people probe for weaknesses they can exploit or barriers they can wear down over time. Authentic people appreciate your complexity and don't try to simplify you for their comfort. Inauthentic people want you to be consistent, predictable, easily categorized. Most importantly, authentic people bring their own completeness to the interaction. They're not looking for you to fill their emptiness. They're looking for someone whose fullness complements their own. This level of discernment, while protective, can feel isolating at times. You watch friends and colleagues enter relationships that you can see will end in predictable disasters. You want to warn them, but you've learned that people must discover their own patterns in their own time. Your role isn't to save others from their choices, it's to model what conscious choice-making looks like. Your life becomes a quiet demonstration of what's possible when someone commits to psychological growth rather than psychological comfort. Some people will be inspired by your example, others will be threatened by it. Most will simply be confused by it, and that's perfectly fine. You're not living your life to be understood by everyone. You're living it to be true to yourself. The intelligent man eventually realizes that his earlier frustrations with dating and relationships weren't really about finding love. They were about finding himself. The journey that began with, "Why don't women appreciate my intelligence?" evolved into, "How can I become the man worthy of someone else's appreciation?" This shift from external focus to internal focus changes everything. You stop trying to find the right person and start becoming the right person. You stop looking for someone to complete you and start completing yourself. You stop seeking validation and start creating value. And ironically, this internal focus makes you far more attractive than any external strategy ever could. Because a man who is actively becoming his best self radiates an energy that no amount of pickup techniques or performance can replicate. The woman who is meant for you will recognize this energy immediately. She won't need to be convinced of your worth. She'll see it in how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you make decisions, how you treat others, how you handle challenges. She won't be impressed by your achievements. She'll be attracted to your character. She won't fall for your performance. She'll fall for your presence. She won't want to change you. She'll want to grow alongside you. When you find someone operating at this level of consciousness, the relationship unfolds differently than anything you've experienced before. There's no game playing, because neither of you needs to win. There's no manipulation, because neither of you needs to control. There's no performance, because neither of you needs to impress. There's simply two whole people choosing to share their completeness, rather than two broken people trying to fix each other. But until that meeting happens, the work continues. Not the work of finding someone, but the work of becoming someone. Someone who doesn't need a relationship to feel complete, but would welcome the right one. Someone who doesn't fear being alone, but remains open to genuine connection. The path of the intelligent man is not an easy one. It requires courage to think independently, strength to stand alone, and wisdom to distinguish between what deserves your energy and what doesn't. It demands that you develop your own values rather than inheriting society's, that you create your own meaning rather than accepting what others provide. But this difficulty is also its gift, because every challenge overcome makes you stronger. Every lonely night endured makes you more self-sufficient. Every false connection abandoned makes a room for a true one. You are not broken for wanting more than what most people accept. You're not damaged for refusing to settle for surface-level connections. You're not flawed for choosing authenticity over approval. You are evolved. And evolution, by its very nature, is a solitary process. The butterfly cannot transform while remaining in the cocoon of others' expectations. And that person is worth waiting for, worth staying authentic for, worth all the loneliness you've endured to become who you truly are. If this resonates with your experience, share it with someone who needs to hear that their depth is not a defect. Subscribe for more content that honors your intelligence instead of asking you to hide it. Your mind matters, your standards matter. Your refusal to settle for less than authentic connection matters more than you know.